afternoon, good evening to all. I'm remembering to not load the presentation right away so I can be on the camera as I'm addressing everyone and introducing the topic. And please don't measure the symmetry or the lack thereof between the two plants behind me. I'm sure it's not center, but hey, we have our strengths and we have our weaknesses in life. I do my best. So thank you for coming back. The last, the introduction rather, the last webinar, which was the introduction to this three-part topic through the ages, I had a lot of fun with because regardless of where someone is in their profession or personal journey, if you're here, health matters to you. And we appreciate that. And we want to do our best to provide you the best quality information that we can. And we just decided to cut it up into different segments because there are certain things that are reflective on all aspects of human life in terms of lifespan, but there are also a series of considerations and aspects of life that are most pertinent depending upon where you are in your journey. What matters to a 70-year-old health-wise might not be all that relevant to a 20-year-old, so that's why we're cutting them up into the areas that fit really well together. So last month we did 20s and 30s. This month, as promised, we are doing 40s and 50s. We're going to start going through the ages, part two, dum dum dum. It's kind of an ominous music choice now that I think about it, but 40s and 50s. So we're going to introduce the exact same point where we introduced last time. We're highlighting what I'm calling the shift to midlife and the unfortunate nature of the loss of vitality. So depending upon what someone does in their 20s and 30s, categorizes what they experience and sets the tone for what they experience in their 40s and 50s. Most people who are not into health or who get into health later in life realize that their 20s and 30s were less than optimal, and they're scrambling to try to recoup or maintain what they still have left or trying to reverse the course of action of what's already started. So we want to bring that perspective into the average person we're talking about. When they were in their 20s and 30s, the information that we have available to us today was not as available. So nowadays, with the advent of this thing called the internet, but I would say even just the availability of quick information with AI, you can get access to so much information, which is incredible, but also has the potential to be very, very overwhelming. Sequels are hard to pull off, so I'm going to do my best to live up to these amazing videos. I would probably say that in some cases, some of these sequels are better than the first. That is my hope. I can definitely say that for the Star Wars. So we talked about this last time. I want to refresh this topic of conversation. Biological age and chronological age, and we're going to agree upon the fact that they're not necessarily the same thing. Biological age is very easy to know. It is the number of birthdays you've had on the calendar. Sorry, chronological age is the number of birthdays you've had on the calendar. Biological age is really how your physiology is operating as a whole. There are a few different ways you can measure biological age. You can look at telomere length. You can look at some sort of computation based upon the result of a heart rhythm test. If you want to go really deep in terms of understanding things, you can actually take swabs or samples of cells and break apart the nucleus and the DNA and look at how the DNA is presenting itself relative to the cohort of the age. But regardless of how valid the test is, if someone gets a test and their chronological age is exceeding their biological age is exceeding their chronological age, clearly mine is today, they're in a position of compromise because they're no longer in a position of health. They are entering into a position of dis-ease. And Jeff mentioned the call that we have with the internal crew of the Master Supplements US Enzymes team. And I introduced this idea to them, and I thought about wordplay, because wordplay is a really big thing in my way of communicating with people and with clients, but language is an interesting thing in and of itself. So the word disease and the word illness are often synonyms. If you break apart the word disease, it becomes dis-ease. So when someone's in a state of dis-ease, their body is essentially stressed. It's a very simple way of explaining it. To me, dis-ease leads to illness. So what we want to do if someone is biologically older than their chronological age, we have to understand where their dis-ease is, how the body's presenting it, and what are the factors at play that have to be addressed in order for that biological age to start marching backwards and eventually meet, and then negatively overtake chronological age. So you're the guy who's 50 or the girl who's 50, but you're performing like someone in their 40s. So what are the influences? again from last time, the influences of things that make biological age faster than chronological age are essentially summed up in the statement burning the candle at both ends. Easy lifestyle factors that we dismiss until it's too late because we have to focus on them because we're suffering too much. Sedentary lifestyle, lack of exercise, not prioritizing sleep, making your diet something that comes out of a brown paper greased bag, not managing stress, taking on more stress than we potentially need to achieve the things we want. And as a result of that, our aging curve looks like a hockey stick. Up until the fact of 25, 30 years old, things are pretty good. Then boom, all of a sudden you look like, you know, what's the character in Star Wars? The Emperor in Star Wars, the old wrinkly thing. And unfortunately, at some point when we're in a certain phase of our life, and this is the phase we're entering today that I want to introduce, when we go too far into a state of compromise or a state of dis-ease, you can only reverse so much given expectations of time and available opportunity. So the long and short is, yes, we're going to get into supplements and talking about how these things develop. But the things that I see that most people benefit from are also the things that we like to forget because we like the shiny new object, or we like the new supplement, the new tech toy that's coming out. The everyday positive influences of healthy lifestyle habits and making those things consistent, albeit boring, are really the things that work out well for us in the long term across all demographics, all genders, all ethnicities. The human body, for the fundamental reason that they're all connected and all very similar, usually respond positively to all the same things that anchor health. So I introduced this idea last time, and I introduced this idea about a year ago. This is my model for understanding how health starts to slip away from people, because there is theory and then there is practice or practical applications. There's an old saying that says, in theory, theory and practice are the same thing. So this is a way of introducing an idea that says nothing specifically about taking a specific disease diagnosis and explaining how that came to be, but it's an overall model that I think is really important for clinicians and even individuals to understand, because there's beauty in the simplicity of understanding what drives these things in the wrong direction and what reverses the direction to get things back into a better state. To me, health is everything, and everything is energy when it comes to health. A body that has enough energy to always heal and repair itself is a body that's going to maintain its state of health and likely not fall into a state of dis-ease. Energy is just the body's ability to make as much energy as possible inside a cell, so therefore inside a tissue, inside an organ, so that organism shows signs of vibrance, healthy amounts of muscle mass and low amounts of body fat, healthy looking skin, hair, brightness in the eyes, quality fingernails, things of that nature are physical signs of having a lot of energy in the body. When energy is high, the body has a lot of adaptability. This is why children always bounce back and have tons of energy, regardless of what it is they're dealing with in life, because the adaptability that comes with having a lot of energy determines optimal function in the body. What we do in the Western world specifically is we push the envelope on our adaptability. When we start to shrink our adaptability and we put our body in a state of compromise, we start to reduce the overall amount of energy we have because we're under recovered. When we're under recovered and we lack energy and we push ourselves more, we continue to shrink that adaptability window. So optimal function is just a nice idea, and we start to live in a state of compromised function. How I define optimal function is through the body's identity in and of itself. So the body has a sense of self-identification. Based upon the DNA in every cell of your body, and the blueprint of how that DNA manifests, that's how a liver cell never becomes a neuron, or that's how a red blood cell never becomes a white blood cell. Body has an aspect of self-regulation. This is why we have hormones of satiety, for example. We have insulin that gets released upon eating carbohydrates, which drives sugar into the cell. And once the cell's had enough sugar, blood sugar level lowers, the body regulates its energy status again. We have this thing called self-compensation. If you roll an ankle and the ankle swells, that's a good thing, because the compensation for an injured ankle is the body's natural ability to create a lack of mobility so that ankle rests and heals. And then that dovetails into self-regeneration, because when the body has energy and time, it heals itself. So I believe this is a pretty sound fundamental way of explaining how someone stays healthy, because they honor the system, but also what happens when someone gets sick, this system breaks down. And really, the 40s and the 50s are a tipping point. because we're entering the stage where our rate of injury for the average person, and I don't mean injury physically like falling out of a tree or getting into a car accident, where you have enough internal biochemical insults that cause injury that requires a shift in how the body operates to heal that injury while still trying to maintain optimal function. This is why health typically starts slipping away in the fourth and fifth decade of life because our energy reserves are depleted to the point where we can do this seamlessly without noticing that our body doesn't feel quite as good. I tried to think of everything that could be an influence, and I put it on this slide. So everyone's going to get this slide. So I encourage you to go through it in deeper detail, but I'm going to take all of these things, all of these physical and non-physical stresses, and I'm going to call them the sum of all physiologic stressors. And what I mean physiologic is something that you can experience within the body, something that affects things like the HPA axis, cortisol output, negatively affects the digestive system, compromises the ability to get quality sleep. Everything that's physical and non-physical has to be experienced, interpreted, and responded to by the body. And this list is quite long. And this is why disease is so complicated. In the Western world, more and more people in the medical industries try to understand health by studying the depths of disease. To me, it doesn't make sense. What you'll get really good at is understanding the action-reaction response of how certain things influence the body. Case in point, someone has a long latent viral infection like Lyme. There are certain things that have predictive factors of where that's going to affect the body. But it's how all of these things can add up together in a perfect storm inside of a person that eventually is what creates the disease presentation outcome because there are only so many ways that the body can get sick. You can have physical injury, you can have chemical stress, be it a toxic burden, the aftermath of a long viral infection. You can have high levels of physical exertion, you can have environmental stress, electromagnetic stresses, and then all the non-physical things, which I believe, given what I see in the clinic, are really the largest drivers of what most people suffer from because they're insidious. States of mind, thinking processes, emotional dysregulation, just the simple busyness of life is an incredible aspect of depletion that people just accept as normal because it's part of the life they live. But it doesn't mean that their normal life is necessarily uplifting them and putting them in a better state to be healthy. We have to understand it's the sum of all of these inputs that create the output, or in this case, the disease presentation outcome. So this is really a quick and dirty biochemical process of understanding that there's a fundamental simple nature of how the body stays healthy. A body needs nutrition in the form of oxygen, carbohydrates, fats, proteins, vitamins, minerals, and then there are the other things like high quality water, photons from the sun, making sure we're honoring our circadian rhythms. But if we compromise any of that, the body tries to compensate and maintain order among chaos. So if anything changes the activity of nutrient delivery, if for some reason we can't deliver oxygen, the macronutrients, the micronutrients to the body, doesn't matter where that ends up in the body, every cell that's going to be lacking nutrition and lacking oxygen is going to have a shortage of energy production potential. So when there's a lack of energy for things to come into the cell, that cell also doesn't have enough energy to take all the waste materials out of the cell and remove that waste from the internal environment of the cell, which compromises its internal state otherwise. So if the cell is not detoxifying, it starts to accumulate. And accumulation of cellular wastes in the cell or in the tissues of detoxification and removal, i.e., the lymphatic system, the liver, the kidneys, the venous circulatory system, that causes the body to have an increased toxic burden load. And if that's the case, then all of a sudden the immune system needs to be recruited. And therefore, the immune system is going to steal energy from other areas of the body because it needs it in order to keep vigilance and watch over all of these potential threats in the form of material wastes that may be circulating around the body. So all of a sudden, now you have a system-wide function breakdown because the immune system is always trying to heal the body from a potential threat. So the cellular communication starts to break down. And that kind of sounds a little bit like autoimmunity, doesn't it? I'm not saying that this is the absolute path to autoimmunity, but there are definitely aspects of this process that are at play. And the reality is the body will continue to compensate as optimally as it can and optimal becomes a shrinking window in terms of the definition of the word until the body cannot. And this is when a state of dis-ease happens, and the symptom presentation and eventually the ceremonial naming of the disease that most people get, unfortunately, in their 40s and 50s in this day and age is presented to that person. Or we can just simply say that this is a very true statement of what it's probably like being in your 50s and no one prepares you for. At least not in this part of the world. I've seen people in their 80s in different parts of Europe still hopping up and down hills, gardening, but we don't need to focus on keeping our bodies in such good conditions nowadays because most of us spend most of our day sitting in a chair, driving in a car, or working at a desk under fake lights, dealing with a lot of EMF. And we wonder why we're struggling in any way, shape, or form. So I know that's a little bit of a grim tone, but I think it's really important to understand that there are patterns at play. And like I said, the practical aspect of being a clinician is getting really good at associating the patterns with your specific field of expertise or the discipline of study you want to focus on most. The theoretical aspects that connect to the practical is no matter what the condition is, where it ends up in the body is typically the area of greatest susceptibility in that person's physiology. But the nice thing is there's a lot of overlap in the understanding of how those diseases develop. Someone has digestive issues, fast forward 20 years, that can be a neurological disease. That can be an autoimmune condition, or it can be a cardiovascular or a cancer presentation. But the digestive system is always implicated in the breakdown. So I think it's important that we all understand some of these patterns from a philosophical perspective, and then take that and apply it to our specific discipline of specialty through the lens of how we assess people and how we treat people. And I'm hoping that that does help people become better clinicians when they take on this ideology. So what is it the 40s and 50s offer us other than sounds like the development of disease? Well, there are greater aspects of understanding of ourselves in the world. When we're in our 20s and 30s, there's a height of ignorance to even knowing that our bodies are fragile. But when we enter our 40s and 50s, we have a greater respect for that which doesn't work like it used to. Hopefully, if we are not necessarily in the best state of operation, we have greater financial freedom to invest in processes of resolution or in high quality products made by great companies who want to help people get better. And the lessons and learnings and the mistakes in the game of life let us know why we don't eat Big Macs anymore, why we choose organic food when we go to the grocery store, why we spend extra money on a reverse osmosis water filtration system, because we know what happens if we don't make these things a priority. But the reality is the challenges that we face are we have a shrinking window of optimal life force available to us, coupled with slower recovery time. And the likely reality is most people who are in their 40s or 50s who are on this call who will listen to this probably have something going on. So we need to take what the 40s and 50s offer us in terms of upgrading our intellect and our awareness and channel that into activity and action to hopefully help make our health a priority in resolving some of these issues. So the people in our world, the Master Supplements US Enzymes demographic, who are in this various age category, we separated them into the top three people. And those are the people who are trying to get their vitality back and maintain it. So something has opened their eyes to the great awakening of the world of natural health and supplements and how they are probably a mainstay necessity in their household in order to make their life and their health better. There are those who are unwell and trying to get well the natural way. More and more people, thankfully, are waking up to the fact that the Western medical system does one thing really well, and that's diagnose and treat an acute care crisis. And I've always said, if I'm in a car accident, I'm not going to the herbalist. Take me to the hospital. If I have a staph infection or a broken bone, that's where I want to go. But because people don't sit there and, again, back to wordplay, think of the term healthcare and that healthcare encompasses everything that is medical. If you have a chronic degenerative condition, other than managing it with pharmaceuticals, you don't have much of an option when it comes to the traditional allopathic system. So people are taking initiative and power into their own hands, and they're trying to understand the natural way, be it from a diet, supplemental, and lifestyle perspective, that synergize with what it is they're dealing with. We have a lot of those. And then the third and my favorite group are the health warriors. And these are the people who could probably teach the average health practitioner a thing or two because even though their profession may not be in the health and wellness industry, in their free time, this is all they read about. They're high performers, they're typically active people, and they're doing this again because in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, which is coming next month, they want to feel as good as they can and be those people who do not take any medications, who are the extreme outliers in those age categories. So we're going to get into the foundational products that can be used in this 40s and 50s age category. Now, again, these are not exclusive, but they're things that we wanted to highlight from a perspective of going into a good product education as a reminder for everyone, but also looking at how these things can fit in the bigger picture of what most people deal with and suffer with during this time in their life. The digestive system is always, always implicated, and we have our master philosophy, which is our way of looking at everything while making no claims about what it is we're addressing. And the first part of the master philosophy is always addressing digestion. If anyone knows most of what these terms mean, hypochlorhydria, cholestasis rather, pancreatic insufficiency, these are the things that typically happen when the digestive system starts to break down. And as these things, these digestive secretions downregulate, we have changes in terms of the internal structure and the internal function of the digestive system in and of itself. So the lumen refers to the tube. We have changes in the pH, not for the better, typically more alkalinity in one area, maybe more acidity in another area, and we have changes in transit time. What does this mean? Well, it's definitely a party for opportunistic pathogens, bacterial wise. And if things move through the system too quickly, you don't absorb it properly. If they move through the system too slowly, then you have metabolic waste just sitting in your body ready to be reabsorbed. Changes in gut barrier function, the breakdown of the gut barrier is what we know as leaky gut, and then changes in waste release patterns, where most people nowadays are defaulting to chronic constipation, which does affect women a lot more than it does men. And anytime someone has chronic constipation, the body's thrown off from not only a digestive, but a nervous system perspective as well. So that's why we're starting with Enzymase Pro. These are one of the two products we're actually featuring this month. We've talked a lot about Digestzyme Pro, and a lot of people say, well, what's better, Digestzyme Pro or Enzymase Pro? There's no better, there's just different options. The formulation of Enzymase Pro isn't as focused on the carbohydrate and protein digestion, although it does have a full complement of enzymes, but it's more focused on fat digestion with a higher content of lipase, which is a fat digesting enzyme, accompanied with a sodium alginate. So this actually does the deep delivery thing the same way that all of our probiotics that are also paired with sodium alginate do. Enzymase Pro is really good for anyone who's on a lower carbohydrate diet. Let's say someone has been told by their practitioner to do more of a paleo, ketogenic, carnivore diet. Well, those are typically very high fat diets. So making sure that you can break down all that fat will prevent you from having disaster pants, which is absolutely a thing. Additionally, gallbladderectomies at one point were done just almost willingly by people. Now we're realizing that you take out an organ, there may be some collateral damage, but making sure that you have some extra fat digesting enzymes for those who don't have a gallbladder, who can no longer concentrate bile, might alleviate some of their symptoms, especially if they do pair it with a bile supplement from another company. I also look at this as a really good insurance policy when you're eating larger meals or eating out, because typically when you're eating at a restaurant, flavor is prioritized at most restaurants over health and quality, not the case everywhere. But if you're going to go somewhere and you don't necessarily trust the food preparation, the macronutrients and makeup of the food, taking something like this as a preventative strategy or just an insurance policy strategy is a really good thing to do. And you can pair Enzymase Pro with HCl-Zyme because HCl-Zyme is supplemental hydrochloric acid support with AstraZyme, which we actually have published data on, ensuring that the combination of AstraZyme with betaine hydrochloride helps to maximally improve protein breakdown through supplementation. So what does HCl do? HCl is essentially the initiating process of digestion when food goes into the stomach. So the stomach is the principal site of protein digestion, and large protein molecules need to interact with hydrochloric acid to start denaturing and breaking these large molecules down into smaller molecules. And you want sufficient protein digestion done in the stomach before the rest of the digestive cascade takes over, because once food releases itself from the stomach and enters the small intestine, that's when the pancreas and the gallbladder and all of the other digestive secretions take over. So making sure that you have adequate protein digestion ensures that the rest of the digestive cascade takes care of itself. And as we age, our stomachs produce not only naturally less stomach acid, but the pH acidity of that acid slowly becomes more alkaline. So not only do you not neutralize potential foodborne pathogens, if you're not properly digesting your proteins, these proteins are fermenting. And if you take a fermentation product and you allow that fermentation product to enter a tube where there's lots of bacteria, yeasts, fungus, and things of that nature, you can promote the overgrowth of bacteria where it shouldn't be in the small intestine, and you can promote the overgrowth of pathogens, providing you give them a source of toxic food to fuel themselves with, which is what happens when proteins enter into the colon. And then the third one of the foundational digestive products is True Flora Pro. And the reason I picked this one is most people who have digestive issues at some point either come across the known fact that they have issues with overgrowth of yeast, specifically Candida yeast, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. True Flora Pro is one of the three probiotics that we have as what I call a targeted suite of probiotics. True Flora Pro specifically being targeted to the small intestine because it has a bio-cleansing action with its lactobacillus only formula. All of these strains are designated as all of our probiotics are, with the addition of the lactostim, which helps to maximize the awakening of the bacteria once they've been deposited in the small intestine, and the sodium alginate ensures that they're going to get there without necessarily being compromised by the acidity in the stomach. Problematic yeasts cause havoc for people because they're very resistant creatures to being eradicated. They have the ability to develop what's called a protective wall. It's a hyphae that is a biofilm. So our immune system at some point can't actually deal with the yeasts when they've created a little cloaking device. Yeast can only grow when the terrain is optimal. So we did very recently talk about changes in the pH of the digestive system. If your system becomes too alkaline, that is a yeast promoting environment. So what these bacteria do is they're lactic acid producers. They produce acids to help bring down the pH of the local environment, which becomes an unhospitable environment to the yeasts. Once this happens, the yeast become challenged because they don't do well in an acidic environment. So it starts to help the immune system and the natural bacteria to overwhelm the overgrowth of yeast. The addition of the enzymes with the probiotic bacteria also targets the cell wall of the yeast, that cloaking device that I mentioned, so that they can break down their defenses so the yeast can properly be wiped out. So if you want to use this product in conjunction with some herbal cleansing formula or something like a Cleanzyme, it makes it even more effective, providing the person's system isn't too sensitive to be thrown off by killing yeast, because a Herxheimer's reaction is a thing. It is a powerful experience for someone. If they're not feeling good, it can really ruin their day if you go too hard too soon. So this is a great starting point if you want to address problematic yeasts. So now we're going to talk about maintaining other specific areas of the body, because typically in the 40s and 50s, when I say there's something going on, you start to see signs of that. You could see signs of it in a functional medicine test. You can see signs of it in a comprehensive blood panel, or someone just experiences very specific symptoms that let them know where their area of weakness might be. But it's important to understand, even though you have a specific area you're trying to target, you have to still take into consideration the holistic nature of how that area of compromise not only is affecting its specific function, i.e., the cardiovascular system, and not having blood flow through the arteries well if we have plaquing of the arteries. But if the cardiovascular system is the area that's compromised, that means oxygen and nutrition delivery to all working cells is also going to be compromised. Because an organ, remember, works as a part of an organ system. So when it cannot contribute its critical function to the network of the body as a whole starts to suffer. So we're going to start with Sun Spectrum, and this is a product that is incredibly well formulated, but it doesn't nearly have the same popularity as Sun Fiber because it's not as brand recognized. The good thing is Sun Spectrum is a base of Sun Fiber, so it's the exact same fiber as in Sun and True Fiber. All the research behind it and how it's a bifidogenic stimulating formula. It's a fiber that doesn't cause bloat, abdominal distension, and digestive upset. And it's also targeted to feed only the good microbes and not feed some of the problem microbes like, say, inulin does. But it's also a synergistic blend of curcumin and coenzyme Q10, both of which are nutrients that are great for dealing with metabolic issues and specific aspects of immune activation and inflammation. And the third aspect is a specific strain of probiotics that's a bifido to help calm the digestive system. This is a really good product for those who have things like IBD, Crohn's, colitis, because a lot of fibers really do irritate them specifically at the gut lining because of the dysbiotic proportions of certain strains of bacteria that go nuts when you feed them certain kinds of food. So those who are dealing with things like IBD or additionally IBS, leaky gut, any kind of digestive issue, if there is an inflammatory reaction within the digestive system, this is the go-to fiber because it does have some local immune modulating capabilities. And because it's a totally soluble fiber, it's not going to be irritating to produce any additional quantities of gas, bloating, or potential changes in bowel habits that people often get when they're trying to supplement with a fiber while dealing with a digestive issue. Then moving on from the digestive system to what's more of a network circulatory system, we have natto, and I'm going to lump lumberzyme into this. Nattokinase has become really popular over the last few years for a reason we will leave unsaid, but I'm sure all you can assume what I'm talking about. Nattokinase is a wonderful proactive supplement, but it's also a really good reactive supplement for dealing with any sort of problematic proteins and inflammation floating around within the cardiovascular system, specifically within the arteries. Because most cardiovascular systems happen with, most cardiovascular issues happen within the arterial system because the arteries can narrow in a way that the veins cannot. So this is the highest dose, purest form of nattokinase you can get. The quality is top notch because it comes from Korea, if I'm not mistaken. And we've paired it with catalase, which is a very powerful antioxidant enzyme, and astrazyme, which we know is an enzyme activating cofactor. I'll say this again, every enzyme needs a mineral as a cofactor to activate that enzyme maximally. So taking nattokinase without cofactor enzyme activation reduces the efficacy of what nattokinase can do in the body. Specifically, it targets the breakdown of fibrin, which is not the entirety of cardiovascular plaquing, but it is a major component of the buildup of plaque. Plaque typically develops when there's an injury in the cardiovascular system, so you can think of it as an inflammatory insult. And usually the immune system is the thing that initiates the buildup of plaque. And fibrin is one of those proteins that gets attracted to the site of inflammation and embeds itself into the plaque, creating a more fibrous and dense structure that, when growing large enough, starts to push up against their arterial wall and narrow the amount of window that blood has to flow through the arteries. It usually starts in small fibers and it starts to grow into larger diameter things like the aorta and whatnot. But nattokinase is specifically targeting fibrin to help reduce its content and to initiate the breakdown of arterial plaque in conjunction with support from the immune system. And this is something that you don't have to take simply because you have some known blockage in your system. I think this is a wonderful supplement for most people to take ongoingly because most things that we do in the world that are negative for our health are typically inflammatory for our cardiovascular system because it is a very fragile system of the body. Also, those people who have some long-held immune issues, things like, long viral infections, this has been shown to be one of the best strategies at dealing with some of the issues that are not being resolved by the body because the drivers of inflammation are still present. So nattokinase being one of the best overall strategies to keep your cardiovascular system working well into your later years can also be somewhat interchanged with lumbrokinase. We often get asked, what's the difference? Jeff Thurston and I actually did a video going into the specificities of how each of them works subtly differently, but the long and short is they're very, very similar. The major difference between nattokinase and lumbrokinase from a raw materials perspective is lumbrokinase technically is a non-vegan product. It is the synthesis product of an earthworm. However, it does have, like natto, an affinity for the cardiovascular system and breaking down fibrin. And like natto, it is also paired with catalase and astrazyme because the combination of the three upregulate the potency and the efficacy of how these products can work specifically at the site of need. So the only difference that lumber kinase potentially has as an aside benefit from natto when it comes to function is that lumber kinase likely has the ability to work on biofilms outside of the cardiovascular system. There's a little bit of research that possibly supports that ideology. So if someone is wanting to do something like a dysbiosis protocol, breaking down biofilms that may be housing problematic bacteria and yeast in the gut, lumber kinase might be beneficial in that regard. The second thing lumber kinase typically does in terms of benefit is it doesn't negatively interact with those on blood thinning medications. Nattokinase has somewhat of an anticoagulant effect, a blood thinning effect, whereas lumbro does not, but it has just as strong of a fibrin degrading activity as natto. So in some ways they can be interchangeable for a healthy person who has none of these specific considerations. I think rotating through or even stacking them together, there's nothing to say that you can't do either or. Again, what works for one person might not work as well for another. So a lot of these things are anecdotal and experiential at the end of the day. And now we're going to move to chlorozyme. I think chlorozyme is one of, if not the most beneficially underutilized product in our portfolio because of all the different things that it can do. So chlorozyme is a trio of different seafoods. And I don't mean fish, I mean algae, specifically blue-green algae, spirulina, and chlorella. So you get these powerhouse nutritional foods that have incredible research behind them, everything from having incredibly high net protein utilization. Theoretically, spirulina and chlorella have the highest net protein utilization of any food on the planet, although you're not taking the same quantity as you would necessarily a steak or a piece of chicken, but you get a complete free-form amino acid absorption potential by taking these things. Secondly, they have incredibly high amounts of B vitamins, specifically B12, which you cannot get in the plant world except in an algae. The third thing is they have incredibly powerful ways of helping modulate DNA damage. In Japan, they've used chlorella for years for things like radiation poisoning. So you have these nutritional powerhouses packed with probiotics and astrozymes. So you have a 1, 2, 3 punch of benefits here because of all the nutrient bioavailability plus the gut modulating properties. So chlorozyme can be used in a variety of different ways as a general health tonic or like that of a multivitamin. You can just take it on a regular basis just to ensure that you're getting the nutrition from these foods that you don't really find anywhere else. But I like how they can be used as a gut binder. If someone is doing a detox protocol, gut cleansing, things of that nature, one of the most foundational ideas is you always want to use something that has the ability to bind up toxins being released from dead bacteria or things that are being pushed out of the liver, out of the gallbladder, out of the kidneys into the body for detoxification, ultimately being released through the bowel. So using this as a binder is a really good adjunct when using it as part of a detox protocol or indefinitely as a natural health product. You can take 1 to 2 capsules on an ongoing basis in a preventative way because you want to maximize the nutritional benefits of something that you probably won't get anywhere else. And then there's the sunshine vitamin, or what I like to call the most widely spread deficient vitamin in the Northern Hemisphere, because most people, even when they spend time outside, are not getting enough skin exposed to get adequate amounts of vitamin D through natural exposure to sunlight, especially if you're wearing sunscreen, because that is unfortunately the purpose of sunscreen. So RD3 has a therapeutic dose of 5,000 IU plus a full complement of broad spectrum digestive enzymes. So it can be used as kind of a nutritional supplement support and also a little bit of a digestive aid. Vitamin D is really more like a hormone than it is a vitamin because it does have so many different aspects of immune modulating properties within the body. So deficiency of vitamin D is correlated with a lot of all-cause mortality, specifically autoimmune and inflammatory conditions, because vitamin D helps to upregulate the activity of white blood cells, specifically under the conditions of long-held infections, be it viral, bacterial, so on and so forth. Most people don't know that you can't actually make vitamin D every time you go outside either. In the Northern Hemisphere, vitamin D is typically made only between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. from the months of, call it mid-March until early October. So most people, last time I checked, are at an office chair between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. And when they go outside in the evenings, they may actually have a false sense of their evening sun is helping their vitamin D level. It's actually not true. And the easiest way to figure that out is to get a blood test and look at the vitamin D level, the 25 OHD level. Most people are highly, highly deficient to the point where that's in the 20s or 30s, which is typically the level you see of most people who are chronically ill. So again, if you live in the certain parts of the world that don't have access to good quality outdoor sun, taking one capsule is an insurance policy for long-term health because in the 40s and 50s, we talked about that's when these chronic degenerative conditions really show themselves. One way to silence an inflammatory condition is to restore your vitamin D levels to adequate levels in order to have the immune effect of being able to modulate and regulate your immune system under the conditions of inflammation and immune activation. And now we're going to finish off in antioxidants. Most people hear the word antioxidants, they don't really know what an antioxidant is or what it does, nor do they really understand oxidative stress, because it's really about charges of positives and negatives. The long and short about oxidative stress is if there is a condition of oxidative stress, it means that the immune system is trying to attenuate something. Oxidative stress is always in conjunction with degeneration if left long enough. So all an antioxidant does is essentially donates an electron to balance out an oxidant or a pro-oxidant. Now, antioxidants come in a variety of different forms. You can have antioxidant vitamins, you can have antioxidant flavonoids, you can have antioxidant enzymes. We're going to talk about some powerful antioxidants from a supplement perspective, but we're going to start with light pollution. Most people don't realize that modern lifestyle is dominated by artificial blue light coming from screens of phones, overhead lights, especially the ones that are these high efficiency, really cheap, bright white lights. They're what I call phototoxic, and TV screens. We're always looking at some form of screen, and if we're not getting enough natural sunlight, our world is dominated by artificial blue light, which has a lot of negative implications, not only for our eyes, not only for our brain, but for our circadian rhythm in general. So the glasses I'm wearing, which are not these ones, they're a little less intense because I usually transition to the amber lenses as the day goes on. These lenses are designed to absorb all the phototoxic blue light, so your eye and brain are not absorbing the phototoxic signal from an artificial environment. What people don't realize is blue light does a lot of negative in terms of causing stress in the body because blue light upregulates cortisol response and suppresses melatonin. One of the things that drives a lot of degeneration is chronically dysregulating your circadian rhythm. When the circadian rhythm is dysregulated, the body loses its natural rhythm and timing of when to do things properly, when to upregulate hormone release, when to downregulate hormone release, when to increase energy levels, when to decrease energy levels. All of these things are actually done based upon how our eyes are able to receive light from the external environment. And as the sun goes through its cycle through the day, the body follows the natural rhythm of regulating itself to where the sun's position is in the sky. And as the sun sets and the moon shows itself, that's when the body initiates the rest program or the shutdown. But us being modern humans, we can illuminate our environments artificially. So we can put on all kinds of lights in our house. We can watch TV on a 75-inch screen. We can lie in bed scrolling through a phone. All of these things are going to dysregulate our circadian rhythm and become an insidious way that we can become ill over time. Every single clinician should try to convince their clients to put these on because are you going to convince them to stop watching TV in the evening? Probably not. Are young kids going to stop using their phones in their beds? Probably not. I mean, I hope so. But this is the best compromise there is because you can still look at these technologies and not have the negative aspects of what these technologies do as a pro-oxidant to the entire body through the dysregulation of natural rhythms. So I really wanted to touch on the Hedron glasses today because we've really not gone too deeply into these on a lecture. Jeff and I have had a little bit of a post-lecture ramble, but I really wanted to give some functional science of how these things work and why they're so impactful for modern lifestyle because we're doing more and more to artificially take over our environments and getting further and further away from nature as a whole, in my opinion. Shifting gears to a non-wearable antioxidant, but something you can take, isoquercetin, one of our newer products, is an incredibly unique aspect of how to deliver high bioavailable quercetin to the body. So this is a patented form with its sun active branding, which is essentially a precursor to quercetin called IsoQ. And quercetin, being a bioflavonoid, always works best with a citrus bioflavonoid component, i.e., vitamin C. So the combination of IsoQ and vitamin C acts as a very strong antioxidant. And how IsoQ is made is its solubility is optimized via the fact that it's microencapsulated, so that the structure of the IsoQ in and of itself is incredibly tiny, and it optimizes the solubility of being absorbed with the fat-soluble and water-soluble components of each aspect of quercetin. So this is why you can have a quercetin that's 25 times more bioavailable than some of the competing products. Quercetin is a broad spectrum immune modulating antioxidant. So, yes, it does help with some aspects of oxidative stress. It is a very good thing for people who have histamine issues or mast cell activation. And it's a very useful aspect of exercise recovery because upregulating your body through exercise actually induces an inflammatory response. That actually is what generates the body's ability to improve itself through regular stresses of exercise. There's a lot of studies with things like distance cyclists and ultra endurance athletes that using IsoQ as part of a recovery or performance supplementation protocol enhances the effects of exercise. So what you're essentially getting here is effective immune modulation across a whole spectrum of things with general antioxidant capacity, because most people who are dealing with oxidative stress, those who suffer from it, are lacking antioxidants to offset what's causing the problem. So until you figure out what's driving the oxidative stress, you have to do something to manage it until you can actually resolve it. It also pairs really well with Tovigo. So Tovigo is essentially a very pure, high quality form of green tea extract that can be used in two different ways. You can take it as a daily antioxidant in the form of just simply taking it with a capsule with food, or you can use it where you can treat things like upper GI stomach infections by opening the capsule and putting it into hot water and mixing it around and kind of making a really potent green tea. And I'm doing the air quotes, but it's not really green tea because you're essentially drinking powdered water. And it's oddly satisfying. It's bitter the first time you try it, and then you strangely want to go back for more because there's something about it that's quite enjoyable. And green tea extract is another one of those antioxidants that has an incredible history of research. People have been using it as a thermogenic aid for years because it does seem to have the ability to help aid in enhancing metabolism of the food we eat into the calories and using those calories for efficient energy production, specifically the ability to break down fat and burn fat more effectively for fuel. In general, it is a powerful antioxidant because the EGCG content in green tea has an incredible capacity to soak up pro-oxidative aspects of the body. So these antioxidants are donating electrons, as I said. And because it does come from green tea, a lot of people ask about caffeine and jitters. There are no caffeine jitters because you're just concentrating the EGCG content from green tea without the actual caffeine content to go with it. And I left this one in from last time because sulforazyme or sulforaphane really is the master antioxidant regulator or the antioxidant switch inside a cell. Antioxidants can be quite nuanced in the sense that there are antioxidants that you absorb and ingest. There are antioxidants that are produced within the body that are circulating around different areas. And there are also antioxidants within a cell that help to deal with oxidative stress inside the cell when it's excessive. This is where sulforaphane or sulforazyme works most effectively because it upregulates the master antioxidant switch, which is called NRF2. So if you have a cell that's inflamed, you have an upregulation of this NF-kappa B pro-inflammatory transcription factor. It's a fancy way of saying you have an epigenetic change inside the cell that is making the cell better at generating inflammation because the cell is trying to get rid of something. This typically happens when someone has a bacterial, a viral, or a parasite infection that's actually inside of an organ or inside of specific tissues. The cells are trying to get back to a baseline, so they upregulate inflammation to make the inside of the cell so inhospitable that whatever organism is trying to live in there and feed off of the cell, hopefully it wipes it out so the body can go back to a baseline. When that inflammation has been addressed, you want the body to get out of this mode, but this is an epigenetic upregulation factor. So sometimes you need a switch to push the body back into a recovery mode. The fire department needs to come and finally put out the blaze. This is kind of what sulforaphane does because it upregulates the counter-regulatory factor called the NRF2 factor that allows the body to upregulate the antioxidant response and bring the inside of the cell back down to a more optimal baseline so the cell can express health again and get back to a normal state of operation. So, from a system-wide management of oxidative stress, this product does work really well, and it also has a specific affinity for upregulating certain aspects of phase 2 detoxification enzymes, specifically the sulfation and the methylation pathways. Because when the body is trying to clean itself out, making sure it can detoxify and remove waste materials and various things we've spoken about are essential for the body to get back to a state of optimal health. So, as always, final perspective with this. The categories that I presented here in the products, again, not the final word in anything when it comes to how you have to approach them. The fact that these are the products that I've selected for the 40 and 50 age cohort are partly because they have their uses, but so do all of the products that we talked about last month and what we will talk about again next month. It really is how you, the practitioner, or you, the individual, want to figure out the specific ways or under the specific conditions of how to approach using these products with the people that you're working with. And I want to thank everyone for being part of the sequel. I hope the sequel was as good as the first one. We're going to finish it off next month, the final aspect of our trilogy, Act 3. We're going to do the 60s and up. So, I would love to add as many decades after the fact as possible. Human life expectancy typically says that at the end of the 70s, that's it. But I do know a decent amount of people who live into their 80s and above in good states of health, and we need more and more of that. So, as always, thank you all for your time. Thank you for being here. If you want to ask any specific questions, we can pause for that, and I will do so and take a sip of water.